Perfect. I think that's a great idea. I am Emily. I am your WXOX host for this conversation. We're here with Mary as well, who will be helping us on our tech support. So let's get that started. If anybody would like to participate, what we can do, I think there's only 30 of us. We can do a little bit of a roundtable. Maybe if anybody has anything they'd like to bring up right now that they're doing to electrify voters in their own community. I know at WXOX, we always make a strong list of PSAs and ensure that we have all the information to all of our volunteer DJs to ensure that just about every show makes a statement about getting the vote out. Does anybody else who is on the call have any ideas they'd like to discuss today? And you're welcome to add that in the chat. It looks like Ruth Newman has a show called Election Connection. Ruth, I am going to unmute you, and would you mind telling us a little bit about your show?
Sure. Yeah, this is exciting for me because for the last maybe year and a half, can you hear me all right?
Yes, you sound great. Thank you.
The last year and a half, that's been the whole focus of my show is everything to do with elections. And especially now, it is just so compelling that we get people to vote and that we keep apprised of what's going on because everything is changing so rapidly right now. So I don't know. I mean, this kind of caught me off guard. I just wanted to let people know that I'm very excited. I'm very excited about this session because, so I divide my show into giving people resources, what they need to do, where they need to go, what the deadlines are, all of that, along with doing like candidate profiles and shows about everything to do like voter suppression, voting integrity, the integrity of the system, redistricting, restoring felon voting rights, things like that. And I'm very curious to know what other people are doing. And I want you to know we are the other Louisville community radio station, WFMP, Louisville, Kentucky.
It's great to see you, Ruth. Thank you for joining us on the call today. And I'm sure everyone would love to find out about your show. If you want to drop in the chat details of how folks could tune in. It looks like Russell would like to connect with you. He's in the chat box there as well. That could be a great way for us to share resources in that way too. Does anyone else have any programming they'd like to talk about that they're already doing? Just let me know in the chat box and we can unmute you.
Actually have gone ahead just to make this a little simpler and allowed people to unmute themselves. So
perfect. Thank you, Mary. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is Jim with Austin Airwaves. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you, Jim. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Glad to see you guys here. It's been a great conference. Great conference. Here in Austin, which is an entirely Democratic Party-controlled venue, one of the most liberal cities in the nation. We've had little or no problems as far as voter intimidation or threats or fake mailings or the like. The threat comes from the governor of this great state, a knucklehead named Greg Abbott, who just weeks ago said, each county of Texas can only have one box that you can drop off your mail-in ballot. As you surely know, many people, including myself, I am now a senior citizen, get a mail-in ballot. It's less common and widespread here in Texas as it is in many states, but because of concerns about Republican attacks on the post office, people such as myself prefer to physically drop off their mail-in ballot, which I have done. The governor, and clearly bald-faced appearance of voter suppression, said there can only be one box, one physical box in the entire county that you can drop off your mail-in ballot. Now, that's not that big a concern for Austin and certainly not that big a concern for small-town Texas. But a place like Houston, where they plan to have a dozen of them, and the population and size are greater than some New England states, this was clearly an attack on access to the ballot box. And so good public citizens and Democrats in the ACLU sued the governor, saying, you've given no reasons other than these vague terms of vote security. And the federal court ordered them to allow more boxes. In a final note, just a day ago, the knuckleheads at the Attorney General of the state of Texas appealed that decision with literally days to go before the election. Early voting is upon us. They have now appealed the decision as to whether or not a county can have more than one box. Clearly, this puts doubt in people's minds, which is just what the Republicans want. Poo on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So we're dealing with situations like this all over the country, and I think all of us at all of our community radio stations know that we are very responsible for getting a lot of that information out. So how do you keep up when those things are changing so often?
Right.
There's a lot to keep up with, and it's important to make
Paul
sure.
isn't doing it, looks like.
Yeah, that's how it looks.
Yeah,
Maybe he's co-doing it and he's not speaking right now.
I don't know.
Doesn't look that way though.
No.
Veronica from KSFL, you're welcome to unmute yourself and jump in.
Thank you, Emily. Hey, everybody. So I am from KSFL, Portland Radio Project, here in the anarchist jurisdiction of Portland, Oregon. And we've been doing, much like you were mentioning a little bit earlier, Emily, PSAs on the air. We've got a lot of our local musicians doing PSAs, but we have out-of-state listeners as well. And we, the state of Oregon, have successfully managed mail-in voting for 2 decades. And so our message going out to our obviously Portland Metro and Oregon listeners, but our message going out to listeners in other states is we've done it real well for 2 decades. Have confidence that don't listen to the fear mongering. Have confidence that your vote is going to be counted and mattered because we've done it. And there are multiple states that have done it. We're just an example that we can speak to for our own experience. But that's something that I think we're really trying to focus on. It's just conveying, don't let the doubt that we're all living in because of the propaganda and the miscommunication and misinformation. Listen to the successes and rely on that experience and knowledge that it can be a success to drive you forward and get yourself out there and vote.
Thank you, Veronica, out of Portland. I appreciate that. I do think it's important to keep in mind when we're looking at listeners who are streaming in from all over, what are the general voting messaging that we can contribute to anyone's experience right now?
Great. Sorry, Emily. I wanted to just pop in. We're still having trouble connecting with Paul. Not sure, but if it's okay with everybody, we're just going to go ahead and continue having a sharing session where we're sharing conversation. If we can find Paul, we will bring him in and reschedule at another time and maybe after the conference, or at least get a recording or some words of wisdom for him. So we apologize for that.
Thank you, Mary. I'm really sorry about that, folks, but while we're all here together, like she said, we can open this up and to a general conversation using the chat. You're welcome to use your cameras and see what we can come up with as a collective. Ruth, I see your hand raised. I also got a message from Clay, working with a station. CJ, did you want to jump in and read your question off and start the conversation?
Sure. And if can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, folks. And just 1 second. I have Paul's personal cell number. I'm actually trying to reach him directly, and somebody else is trying to reach me, and it went to voicemail. Okay. Well, we're doing what we can. That said, we'll keep the conversation going. Hi, everyone. Clay Leander. I used to have an eye patch named C-Tone, DJ C-Tone, in the Latin Jazz Mecca. I am it was, or I still do consulting for low power and full power NCEs. And it's one thing giving advice to community stations based on the best practices I've helped to introduce through the community television stations of PEG access, since we're tied in with a lot of educational institutions and getting government PEG cable monies to run our stations. We had to be careful how we manage First Amendment forum law with cable access. Of course, FM is not subject to the same kind of requirements when they defanged the fairness doctrine. How we deal with election season and election issues is kind of all over the place. This is a setup to say it's been one thing to advise stations on best practices, but then I found myself in a situation this time last year, asked to join as management for one of the stations I helped to launch. And I will say that it was easier starting new stations and introducing policies that everybody walking in through the door would have to abide, and they agreed to. I'm finding it a bit challenging to try to introduce policies of a station that is already existing. And we have some people kicking and screaming. Well, not, I'm being exaggerating. But my point being is that here we are getting up on election season, and I only found out after the fact that we had board members and candidates who, board members and DJs who were candidates for office, and it wasn't disclosed to me ahead of time. I had to I had to come down hard with introducing some hardline election season policies adopted from the PEG access stations. As expected, introducing policies midstream when folks were used to a more lackadaisical management prior to we're kind of pushing back a little bit. So I'm just wondering how others are faring in this department, that we both serve as a responsible broadcaster, providing an important public service, serving the public interest, and not being completely content neutral per se, but that we would like to introduce the best practices that come back to the fairness doctrine, equal time for all candidates. If you're registered with the county board or registrar, elections, that you are eligible. It doesn't matter if you're, red, blue, green, or if you're a Communist Party, if that they're legitimately registered with the elections department under the arrangements we would have with the League of Women Voters. Anybody and everybody who's registered for office would have an opportunity for equal time access rules. So anyway, I know that's kind of maybe a conversation piece, ball of wax I'm just trying to navigate, and I'm just wondering how others are faring. I appreciate feedback from fellow colleagues.
Absolutely. Thank you, CJ. I see hands from Ruth and Stephanie. Feel free, Ruth, if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and contribute there. And then Stephanie Schubert, you can follow after Ruth.
I did want to mention one of my shows a few weeks ago was an interview with the Secretary of State for the state of Washington. And they also have universal mail-in voting. They've had it since 2011. And I tried to get Portland's Secretary of State, but never was able to succeed. But I discovered that the state of Washington has gotten a national award for the most efficient, secure election system in the country, and they have universal mail-in voting. So that's a testimonial. If you want to hear that interview, it's on my program. And the thing about equal time, I just want to say, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, I don't think we even have the fair use doctrine anymore. But all that we do, you don't have to have equal time, but what you do have to do is give opposing candidates the opportunity to come on your show. You have to say a disclaimer. Sometime throughout your show, you have to say a disclaimer that that these are not the views expressed. These views expressed are not those views of the station, and that anyone who wants to come on the air can do so and give the other point of view or give the other candidacy. So it's the opportunity, but not any kind of hard and fast rule that you have to provide equal time.
Thank you, Ruth. Forrest from Bellingham out in Washington actually requested a link for that show. If you want to drop that in the chat there,
Okay.
that would be awesome. Stephanie, did you want to jump in and contribute?
Yeah, I'm glad Ruth just said that. We don't do that. I mean, we don't do the disclaimer, and we'll start doing that tomorrow. I wanted to just kind of, I guess, support what Clay is saying. I found this a really, really challenging election cycle. And, you know, in addition to what Clay is saying is that I'm just finding it increasingly difficult, both locally and on the national level at Pacifica, to deal with the fact that people are just expressing their opinions more and more. People are finding it very difficult to contain themselves. The news itself about the election lacks so much neutrality just in and of itself, and it is often so outrageous that people just say what they think about it. And the line between reporting on an outrageous president and expressing what you think of him is becoming so gray by now that a lot of times I have trouble figuring out whether somebody just committed an FCC violation or not, because they're not allowed to express opinions, but sometimes just reporting on him sounds like an opinion. So I'm just kind of backing up what you said, Clay, that it gets more and more difficult. And I find, I'm also supposed to monitor that in audio port, and sometimes I just don't know what's legal and what isn't anymore. So that's one thing I want to say. We have a morning show here at KHOI in Ames, and so we've approached all of the candidates. We have a member of our board who has been taking care of that. All of the candidates, everybody except, well, we don't have a governor's race except the president. She's any sort of local candidates have been approached for an interview, and we're scheduling the ones that that answer. Usually only the Democrats respond to wanting to be on community radio. So it's a little bit of a self-selecting group. We've had a few Republicans. We also have a web page where we put the interviews on the web page. And for those who don't do the interview, we just say did not respond. And I guess that's all I want to say. The American Civil Liberties Union is running actually a paid PSA on our station because Iowa is the last state to allow ex-felons to vote. So they have a PSA informing people about their ability to vote. But I still don't feel like we're doing enough. I feel like we need to be doing more PSAs. We also, on the morning show, we have regularly, the county auditor comes on and not regularly, but often, just to talk about the ins and outs of informing people about voting. But I feel like we should be generating more PSAs and giving our hosts more scripts. So, you know, I'm glad this talk is kind of motivating me to get that done. That's it.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think that's something that we are universally all dealing with right now. Now, when it comes to the legality of it, developing policies within your own stations, does anybody else have anything they'd like to contribute? I'm getting a question about legal or not from Ursula. You're welcome to unmute yourselves and jump in if you have anything that your stations are doing right now.
That was me, Ursula. I'm just using Stephanie's computer. So the question, I think Eddie was just identifying me. That I think that's what was happening. But somebody was asking Clay for more guidelines on what actually is legal to say on the air. It's very difficult right now.
Well, it's okay to jump in, I hope.
Absolutely, thank you.
And thank you for feedback. I mean, it's the conversation. To be clear, just to draw the differences, the PEG public access stations, as I mentioned earlier, we recognized by the U.S. Congress, the FCC, and the Supreme Court as a First Amendment forum on the public access channel. I saw Jim Ellinger name check me earlier, and he might recall during cocktail hour the famous InfoSex case. But bottom line, we are conditioned in this side of community media to manage a First Amendment forum, because when you're a legal forum of that nature, there are legalities in how you specifically handle content. You can't exercise prior restraint. So there's a tricky but professional and well-laid handling of how we approach the free exchange of ideas and dialogue. And I would encourage anybody and everybody here that if you are near a public access station to check out and adopt their policies. With that said, indeed, FM radio, as Ruth pointed out, the fairness doctrine during the Ken Fowler under the Reagan years had basically defanged the fairness doctrine to something absolutely useless. But there were a lot of concepts in the fairness doctrine about equal time. Currently, we are not required legally to provide equal time to candidates. But we as community station managers and boards are certainly free to adopt from those best practices. And as I point out to my board and colleagues, we are in a position, especially at this time when we have very ugly discourse back and forth, we are in a position to exemplify a respect and approach to the free exchange of ideas. And indeed, there's going to be controversy. Any newspaper publisher will tell you that nothing sells copy like controversy. That's part of it. What we need to be is our masters of our forum and masters in facilitating dialogue. And if you can turn that controversy into listenership and help to promote a dialogue, but we have to also not cross the line, something that was brought up yesterday, covering protests and whatnot, that we turn into calls to action, or that we turn it into advocacy. I once worked with an unnamed network of somebody's representative, is present here, who I highly respect, but I worked with the election supervisor, and I had to end up going to Alameda Superior Court to introduce an amicus brief to prevent a hijacking of our station election by some unscrupulous means, which, funny enough, was also regulated by the Secretary of State of California, our station elections. So those same kind of policies that we would have what you say on air about our station elections, as well as the local, state, county, national elections. It behooves us to have certain kind of policies in place. It's a little bit all over the place, and there's we are drawing through this grassroots radio effort an opportunity to share and collect different kinds of policies. It would be good if maybe, I'm just brainstorming out loud here and then I'll shut up in a moment. I'm getting sick of hearing myself, but maybe some kind of working group could be derived from this meeting to come up with something equivalent of a white paper for best practices in handling election seasons in this different kinds of ways. What's happened with new stations that, as I'm helping new LPFMs get on the air, each one says, well, this is how they do it, and this is how they do it, and this is it. And there are a lot of bad approaches being out there that I think if we can emerge with a leadership to promote best practices, that we have something to point to, that we as peers could recommend to other peers who are also entering the game, and maybe create a newer, more civil normal for how we approach election season issues.
Thank you so much. This sounds like it's turning into a little how-to workshop for us all, and we've got some folks who would like to give clarification and add more details. So Ruth wanted to jump in and give some clarification of what can and cannot be said. And after that, Mike Murphy from KHOI and Jim as well. So we'll start just kind of popping in. You all are free to unmute yourselves and go ahead and add in.
Okay, I just wanted to add to that. This is my understanding. We have this written in our programmer's manual. You cannot endorse a candidate and you cannot endorse legislation. You cannot tell somebody to call their representative and ask for certain legislation or oppose certain legislation. You cannot do any of that. However, you can have a guest on your show who can do that. And the only thing is you have to have that disclaimer in your show that these are not the views expressed are not those of the show, but of, you know, the guests on the show. So that's the thing I just wanted to say is no legislation, no calls to action, no promotion of any particular candidate. It doesn't mean you can't talk about the issues, talk about their track record, their history, anything at all that's factual, as long as you don't make, you know, tell people to do something like vote for this person or, you know, or call up and oppose this legislation, anything like that. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you so much, Ruth.
Ruth, may I ask about your station, do you have scenarios where any of your board or programmers are also candidates for office? Under the PEG model, we would disallow that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, we don't. We don't have anybody who is a candidate, and I think that that's written into our programmer's manual. I think, or is that part of an FCC rule? I'm not sure, but that's not the case. We don't have anybody.
Well, thank you so much, Ruth. We are lucky enough to be joined. We've got Paul with us here.
Late, I'm sorry about that. I'm on a job and time kind of got away from me.
Don't worry, we have had a great conversation, kind of just popcorning around all the different strategies right now of what stations are doing to handle this election season. So I think we're all geared up and ready to go. A lot of those questions, what we've been talking about is in the chat. Folks can continue to use the chat feature. We have a national PSA exchange. There's a link in the chat as well, which is very exciting. So
that is very exciting.
Paul, I will let you take it on from here. And folks, if you can just make sure that you are muted as we let Paul take over, and then we'll hopefully we'll have some time for conversation at the end.
Yeah, hi, sorry I'm late. Like I was saying, I'm on a job. We're rebuilding a studio in Bridgeton, New Jersey, which is a farm worker station, WCNU LP. And yeah, time got away from me. I do have a presentation and some slides. And if I could get this off of my headset, that would be nice. It's been kind of a zany day. Let me pick up my slides and we'll get right to it. Probably take actually a minute. I'm interested in what some of the interesting ideas were people were sharing.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a lot of folks who are doing a lot of work at their own stations, but we're looking for some clarification on the how-tos and what they actually can and cannot do. We had some great comments from Ruth out of Louisville. A lot of clarification was coming in from CJ, and just kind of, I think it's a gray area for a lot of people, especially in the election that we have now. We had some comments coming up about everything feeling like an opinion, and it's difficult to differentiate what is fair and even right now.
And I'm wondering if Michael Richards was able to field any of those questions for people.
Yes, yeah, we did have some information come up there, but I know there are lots of other questions coming up already.
Paul, this is Michael Richards here. I know I've been just listening to people, so if I can assist, please let me know. I'll now remute myself.
All right. Well, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I'm on a new Wi-Fi that I've never joined before, and it's just going to be kind of interesting. I intended to do this an hour before the presentation. My apologies. All right. Let's see if this works.
Looks fantastic.
Great. This is going to be too little too late perhaps, but I'm going to go through this. Is this being recorded, or, I mean, is it being broadcast?
It's being recorded.
Okay. Is it not being broadcast?
I don't believe it's being broadcast.
All right.
Sharon, can you verify that? My understanding is it's not being broadcast.
We're not broadcasting. No broadcast. No live broadcast.
Well, then I won't have to read the slides, but if we're broadcasting, I would. I wrote them that way. All right. This is kind of old hat. Why is getting out the vote important? You can read it. A lot of people don't vote. A tremendous amount of people, more than voted for Clinton or Trump in the last election, don't vote. So 40 to 60%, they each got less than 30%. This bullet 3, maybe you want to affect the election. Of course, we're not supposed to do that as NCE stations with 501c3s. But we'll talk about it. Part of these slides is so that if you're covering PSAs and stuff because you want to motivate people, being discouraged because they think it doesn't matter is one of the problems. And so some of these things about razor thin margins and stuff could help activate people, theoretically. So this one, you can see this is from the Washington Post coverage of the 2016 election. It comes down to less than, well, around 1 in 1,000 people were the difference between Trump getting elected and not. And here's a stadium showing 100,000 people. So that's how many people he won by in a country of what, over 350 million people. So a tiny difference can make a huge difference, a tiny difference in non-voter turnout. Now, I'm going to refer to this Knight Foundation study. It's pretty new. It uses a very large sample size, and I can't remember what it's called, but there's a link to it. And they defined 2 categories of the people who don't vote. And they called them the plugged-in voters and the disconnected voters. The plugged-in voters, I've put some numbers in here to show how they break down. So there's progressive type, you know, they're at 8 or 9%, traditional conservatives at 7, modern moderates at 8.2. That category is a little bit different than you might think of. But together they make up 26% of the electorate. Which is nearly as much of the electorate as either Clinton or Trump got in 2016. The disconnected, we'll talk about that too. So the plugged in group, there's a lot of them, and they are capable of voting. They consider themselves voters. They're registered usually. They often have voted before. They do follow politics. They have opinions on candidates, often some higher education. They feel comfortable knowing how to vote one of the things that we like to emphasize in getting out the vote is making sure people know how to vote. These people actually are okay with that. Dissatisfaction with candidates is one common answer for non-participation. And these people at this late date, I would say, are the best return on our investment for trying to get out more voters, because they've probably voted before and they're really close to being able to do it now. The disconnected category, I think this is a tragedy. They're more often socioeconomically challenged. They're screwed over by the system, less educated, less white, less male, and the most poorly represented citizens in the country. But I don't think there's a lot of time compared to the needs of getting folks in those categories to vote. So, you know, that's not something I like saying. But I think if you're looking at bang for the buck simply and not morally, that's something to know. Here's one of the things that helps people vote if they feel socially connected to other voters and feel like they're part of something. And I think probably most of us know what it's like to feel part of something. Trump's big rallies accomplish this. You know, people go there and they see each other and they're all happy and excited together and, you know, whatever. But here's some things you might think about on the radio. You could ask listener voters to encourage their acquaintances to vote, you know, maybe call people that they haven't talked to in a while. And to offer also those acquaintances supportive follow through. So what this does is it connects your listener/voters socially to people who might not vote, giving them that social connection. There might be other social networks, even this late, that you can activate. Probably can't create any, but churches are an obvious one. You know, if you can get it to be popular in a church, you know, to vote, and it wasn't before, that's a lot of voters. And you can educate listeners about reaching out to potential voters in battleground states. I don't know if Will Floyd is in here, but Will Floyd at KMRD and KSFR, was talking to me about calling people in battleground states to get them to the polls. And again, that's one of those things that can be a social connection that can be important for people to take that final step. It's interesting psychologically to know that most people don't take in an idea until the third time they hear it or are exposed to it. So here's a tactic. If you have time and feel like it, use 3 or more different PSAs by 3 or more different voices with different approaches, ideally voiced by opinion leaders among the different groups you will target. I'm sure you've been talking about this already. Schedule them so that your average listener will hear them at least 3 times, which might be scheduling them a lot. Short interviews can be interesting, pretty easy radio to produce, and you can edit them down into PSAs. Some local or some likely candidates are the local League of Women Voters, the local party hacks, voting officials, celebrities, and other folks. You probably know in your community who these people might be. Voting deadlines are changing a lot. Keep your PSAs up to date. Here's just a couple things you might put in your news coverage, actually, or coverage of, hey, you ought to vote, to combat discouragement. You know, talk about the razor-thin margins and how very few people can really be important to swinging an election. Personal integrity is motivational for some people. Being dependent on people who share your point of view or depending on you, or your vote matters because that's how democracy works. Some people like the structural thing, or because it's a citizen's solemn duty. Some people like the patriotic thing. And it matters because you have to stop the other guy from winning. A lot of people like the contest aspect. Can you use fear as a motivator? Yes, but it can backfire. If close to the election, your station is calling Trump a wannabe fascist, it will probably fire up his supporters and suppress his opponents. So be careful how you cover things closer to the election. Here's another example. I'm just going to skip over that one. Voter suppression, spoiling, and misinformation is a thing this season. Well, it always has been. The traditional suppression methods are poll taxes, competency tests, and the threat of violence and lynching. I left lynching in there because I come from a town in the South that has an unfortunate history, including that. So here's some things you might hear. Don't worry if you can't make it Tuesday, you can still vote Wednesday or the weekend. Right. But people say stuff like that, it's been done. Or how about vote twice? We've probably heard somebody recently saying that. It's probably going to spoil the vote if you can manage to vote twice. Felons can't vote, which may or may not be true, but that's often used as a way to keep people away from the polls. You can drop your ballot off at after-hours bank deposit slots. Man, wouldn't that be convenient? Or local book return boxes, library return boxes. Probably not, but it's kind of tempting. Make sure your mail-in ballot is also signed by a witness. What? That'll probably spoil it. They probably won't count it. Scary people who don't like you may challenge or attack you at the polls. This is happening. You know, there's announcements by, you know, that we'll call them quite assertive people might be showing up at the polls. But it's an old thing. I don't know how you combat that, actually. Our early results show one party is way ahead, and that tends to keep people in that party home because they don't have to go vote now because they're already way ahead. That's why TV networks don't give you the election results until later. Or how about only people born in the US can vote? That's also been used to keep people home. And of course, which people are staying home affects the party balance. Here's some things that LPFMs maybe can do that are a little bit different than other stations or other smaller coverage stations. Sometimes we have more homogeneous audiences. So instead of having to think about lots of different non-voter blocks, we may only have one or two. You know, if you're an urban station, you can probably simplify. If you're a, you know, a suburban station, you can probably simplify. We can realistically consider reading off every polling place within the coverage area so people don't have to look it up. Now that sounds kind of weird, but I tell you, if I was wondering and hadn't looked it up, or maybe I don't like using computers or my phone, I think that would be pretty appealing. Facilitated ride sharing, you know, do a ride board online, on the air. It's a little kooky, but it might work. And it would certainly be fun radio. Ultra-local call-in shows with election officials. You know, election officials include poll workers, and there's a lot of them. And, you know, there's workers for every precinct. So there's probably a precinct like within blocks of your station. And those people might talk to you. That could be interesting for people to hear somebody that they might literally see when they go to the polls. Could help them feel a little more comfortable. And then this last one, it's just a brainstorm idea. Invite your listeners to record 60-second clips. Maybe they call an answering machine, sharing their experience of voting, preferably positive experiences. You know, maybe I have pride in what I did, that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that I was envisioning here. Broadcast the clips. That'll help people feel confident and like they're connected to something. And then invite people who hear it, especially if they're new or only occasional voters, to also record their experience after they vote. So, you know, that's inclusion and honoring people who voted, who hadn't voted before maybe. So that's just a brainstorm idea. Resources, you've probably been through a lot of this, but I'll just breeze through it. Some people like officials' voices. That's appealing. Those folks, the local voting officials, they should have the best information. They'll probably be willing to, or maybe even dying to be interviewed. Getting out the vote is part of their job, that's why. And beware that they may prefer voter suppression. I think this is unusual, but it is part of political tactics. So if you get kind of a weird response, that could be why. League of Women Voters, long time advocates of voting, obviously. They're nonpartisan and nonprofit, so you can promote them on a non-commercial radio station. You don't have to worry so much about your language. They're a likely source of interviews about why voting is important. In fact, they've done some, I heard that they've done some youth interviews, which are on, or not interviews, some youth PSAs on YouTube. And there's a Google there that I used to find some. And then they have done some specific radio spots, and there's a link to that. Interestingly, they did this in concert with the National Association of Broadcasters, who are usually our sworn enemies. So maybe they do some good things once in a while. Local political parties have people who are interested in the vote. They may have specialists or something who are really willing to help you out, interview them. You can tempt them into being interviewed by saying that they can mention their party affiliation and that you'll keep it in the PSA that you make from the interview, but you're gonna have to remove any candidate endorsements. If it's a genuine news interview, they can at least promote their candidate, but don't play that genuine interview every hour, because then that's not a genuine interview anymore, news interview. And they may be willing to help you with your PSAs over time, because if it's really their job to get the vote out, you know, they may be willing to go out of their way to try to turn people out. And this is what you guys have been doing. Other stations and producers. You can look through Audioport, radioforall.net, which, if you don't know it, has been sharing audio for more than 20 years. And if you use Audioport, you'll recognize that they're of the same lineage. Grassroots Radio Coalition mailing list, Facebook groups like LPFM Solidarity, which is co-facilitated by Sharon, who you probably all know now. And here's some links. The 538.com one is quite interesting. I love that guy's statistics. And then the Politico one is a review of the Knight study that I mentioned earlier, the Knight Foundation study. And then the last one is the Knight Foundation study itself, which is a lot longer than the Politico article about it. So that was actually, I breezed through my presentation very quickly, and I'm gonna stop screen sharing here so I can see the chat if there is one. And in whatever minutes we might have left, I'm happy to have a discussion with folks.
Great, Paul, thank you so much. There was a lot of information in your presentation, and I believe you were happy to share any of that info with the attendees, correct?
Yes, I probably won't try to do it while I'm, but I'm gonna put a link to the presentation in the chat, one of the chats.
Yeah, just so folks know they didn't have to write down all the links or anything. We'll make sure to get all that information to them. And then we do have a lot of questions coming in the chat, but I'll go ahead and just invite people to join in the conversation if that works for you, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. I know I've seen a lot of comments from Jim. Jim, do you want to unmute yourself and join in and ask any questions to Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I've been working with people doing the shit work, writing the postcards now for months. And and Ruth was right. You cannot have calls to action on an FCC regulated station. In Pacifica, that was used by one of the factions just a year ago to shut down WBAI, and I was actually watching the message traffic about that. So it's best to avoid that. Let the guests do the work for you. I would also suggest the global I'll look for the link. There's a global journalist investigation network that is right now covering the U.S. elections, and it's GIGN. I'll go when I get off the phone here, post that link. It's very useful. Otis and I have been doing a 2-hour daily show since the pandemic began, and we're coming across lots and lots of different well-informed people to deal with the election. I personally think that the left has to really engage the conservatives and really educate our listening audiences about the depths of the kind of situation we're dealing with right now. I threw some names up: Rick Perlstein, Dan Carter, who lives in North Carolina, who did the best biography of George Wallace. But I have a feeling there are literally dozens of people that people here know, and it's useful to share them right now. But yeah, right on with all your ideas about I could get into greater, I follow the polls religiously. I'm educated as a political scientist, so I've been involved in campaigns on and off for 30 years. So right on for all that. But there's just a tremendous amount to do. And, we're in this crazy time. Is it 1932? I don't know, but it sure as hell feels like it. And we just got to sit there and kick ass and stay positive.
Thank you so much, Jim. That is exactly the kind of energy we need moving forward. Ruth, I believe you had a question about reaching more disenfranchised voters. Did you want to unmute yourself and jump in?
Yeah, because, there is this constant conversation that we have on our radio station about, whether we should just be a progressive radio station and just have progressive programs and music, or should we be reaching out to other constituencies, such as conservatives, in order to increase our listenership? And that isn't quite what I meant by disenfranchised. When I asked that question, though, what I meant was all of those people you mentioned at the beginning of your talk who are disenfranchised, marginalized, impoverished, don't see themselves represented, how do we even get them into our radio listenership? Because the chances are they're not the ones listening to our radio station. That's what I'd like to know, is how do I get out into those markets, those constituencies?
I think that's a huge question. I don't think I have any particular wisdom that other people wouldn't have. I mean, social connections are the way to do that. Usually, if one of them has a kid in the softball team and you do a live softball game on the air, then you'll start to, that kind of thing. I don't know a good replacement for that. Also, if there are locations, places where people gather, or things that they'll see, some posters on telephone poles, that kind of thing. I don't know. You can, try to advertise where they're at.
Right. I was trying to look at my other question. I had two questions in there, and now I can't remember what my other question. Oh, yeah. I was wondering also about during the election, whether the radio station can be used as a central clearinghouse for collecting any testimony about irregularities people have experienced.
Yeah, I think there's a tension for me there. I mean, I love local news. I love stuff like that. I think that's what radio should be about. At the same time, if you're saying that there's a bunch of irregularities at the poll, it has to be done well, or the maybe voters might stay home because they'll be discouraged. So it's a balance.
Thank you.
Those were great questions, Ruth. Thank you so much. If anyone has anything else they'd like to jump on, it looks like I've got a question from Sharon. The Democratic Party provides free rides to the polls. Can we announce this on air, or do we need to find a neutral party?
I'm not a lawyer, but there's one going to correct me if I say this wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong about saying that, you can get free rides from the Democratic Party. You just can't say, and you should vote for their candidate. Yeah. In fact, I mean, I was earlier encouraging people to think about reaching out for interviews to the local parties. Just be careful about not, rebroadcasting something where they promote their candidate. But if you take that out, it's fine for them to give voting advice.
Oh, and a second question from Sharon. We've talked about this, thinking of someone like Kanye, who's now on the ballot. How do we consider playing his music as a part of campaigning?
Well, again, I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice, but that is going to probably classify as a use, or it certainly could be argued that in court. a political use, which means that the other party or parties would be entitled to some kind of an equivalent time. And it probably means that you need to put that in your political file and do more paperwork than you're already doing.
Paul, Michael here. I thought you were nudging me. I have only 3 words to say. Bedtime for Bonzo. Remember, when Ronald Reagan was president, every television station in the country had to remove it from its rotation of middle of the night cinema presentations, even though it's just about a man and his monkey. The fact that he was there and appears sympathetic as he cares for this simian creature, it made it so that movie disappeared while he was running for office, both as governor from California and also in his presidential elections.
It used to be shown in New York at 12 o'clock in art theaters all throughout his presidency. But I wanted to get back to the conservative issue. I think that's a very important one. And community radio on the left has to really take that seriously because, we're now living through this crazy process, and we really have to bring these people on the air. They're scholars who've done great work on what's going on, and they got to just be put on the air, and they have great critiques of conservatism. The more the merrier. And I really think that, it's behooving on all the different people, particularly in the red states and the purple states and the battleground states, get all these people on the air talking about this. Although right now, of course, the most important thing is to just simply get the vote out. And best way, I just bring Move On people on. Let them just bring on somebody from Move On. All these different, I know somebody who's been mobilizing women to do, I've gone and helped them for months. See, just bring people like that on who are doing the postcard work, the canvassing in Pennsylvania, for example, things like that. You just have them talk about it. They'll do everything that you can't do. You just can't do a call to action.
Hi, Paul. This is Lewis Leonard in Alaska.
Hey.
I wanted to tell you that if you have a mail-in ballot in Alaska, you do have to have your signature witness. So you will have a witness signature, contrary to one of the lines that you stated there. I'm looking at my own and the instructions right here.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I used that, and I forgot to make the point, is that the voting rules are different in different states, as you know, and so things like that might actually be true in one state might not be true in another state, and that just makes it harder to sift through the BS. And I'm guessing that most, go ahead.
This is Mike at KHOI. I wanted to talk about the equal time aspect. There was a discussion before you joined about this. The question came up about if you have a producer who is a candidate, what the issues are around that. And speaking from experience at my old station, KKFI, so we had one candidate, one person who was exploring being a candidate, and he ultimately, backed out because he found out that he did a 2-hour music show. It was a music show, but that he would be, there's nothing wrong with him doing that, except you would be obliged, if any opposing candidate wanted equal time, you'd have to give them a 2-hour slot, and they wouldn't have to play music. They could campaign for 2 hours. And then a year or two ago there was a host of a public affairs program that became a candidate. And his way of splitting the baby was, well, I'll put someone else on the air, but I'll produce it from behind the scenes. And I was kind of outvoted. I thought we should have been a little bit more cautious than that, but that's what they went with. So he arranged the guests, did all that, but had someone else actually host the show. And I wonder if anyone has any thoughts about that.
May I?
Please.
This is Clay Leander. I manage multiple stations, and each station has their own unique board of directors. In one case that we had a joint powers authority where the school, the city, the community college district had a joint powers authority, multiple jurisdictions, pouring money into supporting the, in this case, the PEG access cable TV station. The policy they decided to adopt was to provide a provision that indeed programmers may, from time to time, as you're allowed to do in this country, run for office. They were not required to give up their program per se, but they were, we allowed for programmers to bring in a substitute guest. Where the rules got tricky and tested is in a case, well, okay, they got a guest to substitute during the period of election season, but we had a loophole in our rules that the person they got as a guest host for the program then interviewed the same person as a candidate for office on the airtime that was reserved for them. And then one thing led to another where the city, where the mayor tried to freeze out another candidate and get more airtime for himself while he placed himself on the Joint Powers Authority Board with the help of RIP Paul. It was another Paul. He was a city manager for Walnut Creek. Gave me a tip to drop this little piece of information into the lap of the city attorney and frame the question as under the California Fair Political Practices Code, that this allowed certain our funds to be used that were coming from the cities and counties to be used for electioneering, and this helped put a freeze on everybody. Now again, this was cable public access TV. We might not be getting money for our radio stations, and so not subject to the same rules. But I bring this up as, you know, it's almost impossible to make it completely airtight. But, you know, again, I would use this opportunity today that maybe we can convene a group of some kind of brain trust to put together, compile best practices guidelines and release a white paper that we can distribute to other stations.
I think that would be fantastic. I would appreciate that. And hi Paul, it's really great to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. And since we have Michael and Clay here, maybe, or even maybe Paul, you too, I'd love to hear a response to this issue of language about Republicans. The example I gave a little bit earlier was that somebody recently called Trump the white supremacist in chief on the air. And I couldn't figure out if that was a violation or not. Like at this point, because it's factual, but it's also kind of slanderous, you know, and kind of implies that you shouldn't vote for him. And I'm just curious, language like that's more and more common these days, you know, as people are provoked by the Republicans.
In the PEG stations, we required all programmers to sign program agreements before they get the shows that they, you know, read it and agreed to our policies, and then they also are all required to submit programmers agreements or programmers contracts of shows that they're going to produce or they're proposing. And in that, we also have a requirement that at the beginning or end of every show, they do have the disclaimer coming back around to the suggestion Ruth was making earlier, that there's some kind of disclaimer. In these situations, when under the First Amendment guidelines of PEG stations, individual programmers, we the station cannot step on the rights of individual programmers. How we dealt with that is because they took legal responsibility and they put the disclaimer, they also this was in video, but you also have an audio underlying saying the following program or the preceding program is the views of the presenter only and holds harmless the station, its board of directors, Comcast Cable, the school district where we had our studio, and then we also welcomed opposing points of view in those situations. Because they are independent programmers, they were allowed to get away with stuff like that, and if the city attorney came to me, I could just shrug and show him the First Amendment. But where we crossed the line is we had that if we actually had hired staff who were producing programs, that we could, that we have to be a little bit more careful and responsible, because now we can't claim that same First Amendment provision as a station and keep friends in the city and in the college district and whatnot. Anyway. You know, it's a bit of a balancing act. One thing that might be approached that I actually am doing at KVSJ right now is saying I had to put a moratorium on all programming I had to do with political, other than the board of directors and the staff of the board specifically are facilitating or that we sanctioned or we pre-approved. So it made a few people unhappy, but because we had both programmers and staff who are running for various city and county offices, we had a robust discussion and everybody had to concede it was probably the right and fair thing to do. And I'll just close by, Ursula, you recently brought to my attention, there was a local programmer in the area who produced a wonderful series about what was happening with Stockton and the current mayor. Part of the tricky balancing act is that some of the people on our board and staff are either supporters or opponents of the mayor, and I had to make the decision to not run the series, which is a bit unfortunate because it's very well produced, and I had to fight with my board about this. Anyway, it's a continual engagement effort. I shut up now.
And I encourage
Thank you so
people
much.
in these wonderful conversations about these especially twisted things about what you can say and not say with whose rules and whatever, is see if there's a way to connect it to how you think it will affect getting out the non-voters. Because to me, this is about getting out the vote this session, and yeah, it's a little bit different than can I say this on the radio, even though that's also important.
Thank you all so much. I know we still have a few questions. We are just a couple minutes away from our keynote panel, Power to the People, which starts in just a few moments on the other channel. We can still continue hanging out here and answer some questions. Paul, thank you so much for your time and for everyone who has joined us here today.
And my sincere apologies for being so late. I just, or whatever.
I think
got
it's
caught up in the build.
It was worth the wait.
Yes, completely made up for it.
Thank you.
You're always worth the wait, Paul. You're doing good work.
Thank you.
I do want to encourage everybody to make sure they fill out a survey on the virtual GRC website as well. And with that, we can get back into any last few questions before folks head to the keynote. Ruth, I think I saw you with your hand.
Well, now that I'm on, I don't remember what it was. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go to somebody else.
No worries at all. If anybody else has any final questions for Paul, feel free to unmute yourself and join in.
Oh, I know what it was. God, why can't I just keep blanking?
I always blame those moments on Trump.
It has to do with expressing your point of view on a political candidate. when Ursula was talking about Trump and calling him the white supremacist in chief, I would say that's a borderline statement. It's almost like name calling. But I think as long as we stick to the facts, and I think that's the most important thing as far as even influencing how people vote, is stick to the facts and try not to say something that is obviously opinionated, like, you know, white supremacist in chief. To me, that's like name calling. But you can talk about his statements that were white supremacist. You can talk about all the various facts related to his support of white supremacy. Now that is perfectly allowable, and it should be said over the air, as long as it's not doesn't fall into the realm of name calling. That to me is kind of like the distinction.
And for the purposes of this presentation, for me, the additional distinction is, what's it going to do to the vote if I have people railing against Trump, even if they're doing it well? Are they doing it in such a way that's going to infuriate and activate more Trump voters to go to the poll? You know, that's a consideration. And vice versa. I mean, everybody here so far has sort of been leaning towards the anti-Trump camp, but at grassroots radio conventions, it's not always true that that's every station.
Yeah. But Paul, is there a quick way to access your PowerPoint? I love some of your suggestions.
I am going to post a link to it in this chat and probably the general chat on Discord. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay.
And as far as those, the PSA information, there are links, lots of links in the chat right now. The chat will be saved. So we'll have all of that content. And the LPFM Solidarity Group, and Sharon also dropped in the Google Doc of a collection of PSAs that folks are working on nationally.
Where did the saved chats end up?
I will confirm with Sharon. Maybe Mary has the answer to that, but I believe it'll live on the virtual GRC website.
They're on Discord currently, but I imagine we can compile them on the GRC website. That's no problem.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
Okay.
Well, thanks everyone.
Thanks,
I guess
Paul.
it's probably time to wrap up. I wish I had been here to have longer chats with the folks that are here. Many of you I love and have known for years, and new ones I haven't, and it's great to meet you. We don't have long until this election, and I do want to emphasize that if we do want to get more people to the polls, look through the slides, figure out where the low-hanging fruit is and go after it. And that's different than doing the right thing of, you know, reaching out to the most disenfranchised.
Thank you so much, Paul. You are wonderful. We're all so appreciative. And like I said, I'll hang out here for a few more minutes if anybody wants to find any other info out of the chat.
Yeah, and thank you also, Clay and Michael, for your information. Appreciate it.
And pinch hitting for the late speaker.
Go back to work, Paul.
In a minute, I'll get you that link and then I'll go back to work.
Good presentation, Paul.
It's
Worth the
soldering
wait.
iron time.
And I appreciate everybody, the dialogue. I saw a few positive comments come in about putting together some kind of white paper. So let's do it. Let's follow up. We're not going to have it in time for this election, of course, but it will be a good endeavor from this, good productive endeavor from this session.
Yeah, this is Paul and
There'll
Chico,
be
and
another
thanks very
election.
much.
Is that Paul and Chico? You can jump in.
I think you just
Okay,
said
yeah,
thanks.
I just wanted to say thanks very much for this and for this important work. And as I said in the chat, our station would very much make use of a white paper that was produced. This has been a sticky issue for us. We had one of our public affairs programmers run for supervisor, and we made the decision to take her off the air until the election was over, which I think was the correct one, but there were a lot of things that we didn't truly understand about the whole issue.
When does the next session begin? I don't want to like put the
now.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just wanted to just add. Nah, I'll save it for the white paper. Bye, y'all. See you over there.
Adios, and I'm going to get you a link in a second.
If you want to post any links, I can share them also immediately into the Discord chat while we're sitting here. And then, of course, I'll save a copy of this chat too.
All right. I am going to put the link into the chat, the Zoom chat. Boy, it's ugly. Somebody ought to test and see if that works for somebody besides me.
Okay. Is it a long one?
It's awful, yes.
Let's see. I'll check it first.
It opened for me. I've got it.
All right.
And it looks great. Yeah.
And I could put it in the Discord chat too.
Yep, I just put it actually in the Discord chat as from you. It's under presidential election, tagged under presidential election.
Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. And feel free to come over. We're going to keep this Discord chat up for, you know, as long as I have computer access to the world. So it can be used even post-conference and be passed on to the next conference. So cool. All right, thanks everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close it down then and get our recordings converting. Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody for hosting.